Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of March 10th, 2015. Welcome, Mr. Mayor, to our meeting. At this time, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam President. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. President Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos. Campos present. Supervisor Christensen.
Present.
Christensen present. Supervisor Cohen.
Present.
Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Marr.
Here.
Marr present. Supervisor Tang. Tang not present. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener present. Supervisor Yee.
Present.
Yee present. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam President, there are no changes and there are no communications.
Okay. Colleagues, are there any changes to the February 3rd board meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve? Motioned by Supervisor Marr, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Without objection, the meetings are approved pending public comment. Madam Clerk, can you please call our special order?
The first item of business is the policy discussion between the Honorable Mayor Edwin Lee and the Board of Supervisors. The Mayor may make initial remarks not to exceed 5 minutes. The President will then recognize the eligible Supervisor Malia Cohen submitting a question from District 10. Follow-up questions are in order as long as the entire discussion does not exceed 5 minutes per supervisor.
Okay, at this time we'll recognize the supervisor from the great district of District 10, Malia Cohen.
Thank you very much.
Before we do so, Supervisor Cohen, the mayor has some opening remarks.
Oh, of course.
Thank you, President Breed. It's great to see everybody this past weekend for the entire Bay Area's enjoyment of our Chinese New Year's parade celebration and the welcoming of the Lunar New Year, the Year of the Ram, and want to congratulate the Chinese Chamber of Commerce and all of their thousands of volunteers that put on a great parade. And again, I want to acknowledge that the Grand Marshal this year was your Public Works Director, Mohammed Nuru. And of course, I want to thank him and all of his staff for keeping our city clean and beautiful. They work very hard, and I see them around the entire city. So when you have an opportunity, please thank their staff as they continue all of our corridor cleaning. Also want to thank President Breed and the board for joining me in the celebration of the end of construction for our city's new navigation center this past week. We know that the status quo is not acceptable and there are still too many people on our streets, and we'll work together to deliver the critical services that will help our homeless residents change their lives for the better. And my hope is that this pioneering approach will help homeless people reconnect with their loved ones at home, move off our streets and into stable housing or residential treatment programs, and get access to the services that they need to stabilize their lives. We're building on the progress that we've made on homelessness in our city for quite some years. And in fact, through our housing and family reunification efforts, our city has helped more than 19,000 people leave the streets, with 11,000 moving into supportive housing that we've built since 2004. And we take great pride in being a city of St. Francis, fighting poverty and homelessness with programs like Healthy San Francisco, Housing First, Treatment on Demand, Project Homeless Connect, and now the nation's most progressive minimum wage, and then our new project that we're beginning to launch called Project 500, with a focus on intense services, case management for our most at-risk families. I just want to thank the Interfaith Council for their partnership with this navigation center and for their working with our Board of Supervisors and our city departments to launch this innovation center that will provide 24/7 counselors to intake new clients, provide meals and safe shelter, and connect homeless people with their critical social services. And as you know, part of this effort is to master lease single-room occupancy units, and those SRO units are being lined up as we speak. We hope that this will be another model that I think we as a city can be proud of. With that, eager to get to Supervisor Cohen's question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that introduction, and again, welcome to the board chambers. At this time, I'd like to recognize the supervisor from District 10, Malia Cohen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Mayor, thank you for coming. Just one very short question for you, but it has a long preamble. And so I begin. So, Mr. Mayor, we both repeatedly discussed our mutual desires to support and increase the number of community-serving businesses along the 3rd Street Merchant Corridor. We've also worked extensively together with your Office of Economic and Workforce Development to support existing businesses, attract new businesses, and to fund physical and tenant improvements in an effort to increase foot traffic and better serve the surrounding community. However, in recent months, several nonprofit organizations and city agencies, including the Human Service Agency, have been looking for office space along the Merchant Corridor. Now, while these organizations provide key services to District 10 residents, they are competing for the same spaces that are needed for new businesses. We've identified office space surrounding the Merchant Corridor where these services can expand and continue to serve District 10 residents. We've also proposed ways that these nonprofits and city agencies might partner together to leverage their collective resources to lease or to buy new space. Given that we have room for both new businesses and expanding city departments in the Bayview, do you support efforts to prioritize 3rd Street storefronts for commercial businesses? What is your position on where various city agencies should locate in the Bayview, which includes HSA? Thank you.
Well, Supervisor Cohen, thank you for your question, and I know that you and I both share a vision to support and strengthen our diverse neighborhoods throughout your district and throughout the city. And I want to thank you for supporting my Invest in Neighborhoods initiative that has helped neighborhoods serving small businesses through a variety of programs along the 3rd Street corridor. I want to name some of them because I'm proud that these companies exist and they're thriving. Auntie April's, which I get to have chicken and waffles once in a while, only when Anita lets me. Yvonne's Southern Sweets, more than when Anita lets me. Let's Eat Barbecue, that's my next visit. Kennedy's Market, La Laguna Taqueria, just to name a few. And I'd be glad to name those in all the other supervisors' districts because I know you're also very proud of these districts because these small businesses have struggled. They always are about family, and I know that as they both survive and flourish, we want them as major parts of our commercial corridors. You know, just last month I had the pleasure of walking the corridor along 3rd Street with Yvonne Hines of Yvonne's Southern Sweets, who started her business as a single mother, making mouth-watering Southern homemade sweets along the redevelopment 3rd Street corridor. And now she's a staple in the Bayview, and I want to see more businesses like Yvonne's continue to be successful in our neighborhoods for years to come. That's why the Invest in Neighborhoods initiative will continue to attract neighborhood-serving businesses to vacant ground floor storefronts to support the community's vision of a thriving and diverse 3rd Street corridor. Supervisor, to answer your question, the simple answer is yes, that we need to, I think, emphasize for the commercial corridors small businesses that could be located there. And I've seen these efforts with our Invest in Neighborhoods not only thrive, they've been very successful. And in fact, throughout the rest of the city, we've had a 2% drop in vacancy rates as a result of this initiative. You know, with a 20% vacancy rate along 3rd Street corridor, we need more of that attention, and we'll be able to get there in the next few years. I want to see things improve in the right direction for the Bayview, as I know you do. This progress is good and supports the vision that the community has defined for itself. I'm also supportive of complete neighborhoods, but I do know that for our commercial corridors, the emphasis should be on commercial ideas. I think that the best solution to this challenge that you've articulated is to have our agencies that are looking to expand work within the confines of a plan that the neighborhood has adopted along with your leadership, and that should help identify spaces that are appropriate for business and space that are appropriate for agencies, and also spaces that are appropriate for a variety of nonprofits. City agencies should find more creative ways to establish themselves, and I will honor that commitment. But I also know that there's a lot of nonprofits that could spark a lot of filling of vacancies, just as we see along Mid-Market Street. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate you stopping by today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you please read the consent agenda?
Items 2 through 4 comprise the consent calendar. These items are considered routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Would anyone like to sever any items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On items 2 through 4, Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Mar.
Aye.
Mar, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos. Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. There are 11 ayes.
These items are finally passed and adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item 5 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to direct the Small Business Commission to establish a legacy business registry and authorize an administrative fee for the registry not to exceed $50.
Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Just want to again thank all the folks who have worked with us to make this happen. It is very exciting that we will be the first city in the country to have a registry for legacy businesses. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisor Farrell and Marr. And I also want to thank Nate Albee of my office, who has been working on this for quite some time. But the impetus behind this is really to figure out how, as a city, we can help longtime businesses that have created, given character to our neighborhoods that are being pushed out. And this is the first step in that direction. I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we take this item same house, same call? Without objection, this ordinance is finally passed. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item 6 is an ordinance to extend the reduction of all building code fees for staff services by 7% until October 31st, 2015, and to affirm the Planning Department CEQA determination.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed on the first reading unanimously. Madam Clerk, item number 7.
Item 7 is an ordinance to waive the competitive bidding requirement in Administrative Code Section 6.20 and to authorize the Director of Public Works to enter into a construction contract with Pneumatic Tube Products Company in an amount not to exceed approximately $953,000 for the purpose of modifying the pneumatic tube delivery system at San Francisco General Hospital.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed on the first reading unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you call item number 8?
Item 8 is a resolution to approve 4 emergency public work contracts under Administrative Code Section 660 with Design Space Modular Buildings, Inc., McGuire and Hester, and Albert Electric to expedite procurement and installation of interim structures, which will comprise Fire Station 48 to house fire operations on Treasure Island with a total not to exceed amount of $2.7 million.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, next item.
Item 9, resolution to retroactively authorize the General Manager of the Public Utilities Commission to execute a new 10-year water service contract with the United States Department of Energy for continued water service to the Lawrence Livermore National Lab with estimated revenue of $29.9 million from January 1st, 2015 through December 31st, 2024.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 10 is a resolution to retroactively authorize the Department of Public Health to accept and expend an approximate $119,000 grant from the Public Health Foundation Enterprises to participate in a program entitled Enhancing PrEP in a Community Setting, July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2015.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 11, resolution to retroactively authorize the Department of Public Health to accept and expend a $1 million grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to participate in a program entitled Bay Area Trauma-Informed Systems of Care, September 30th, 2014 through September 29th, 2015.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, Madam Clerk.
Item 12, resolution to approve the award of a license and services agreement to Airport Research and Development Foundation to use the city's intellectual property for an application-based commercial ground transportation trip fee collection service.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item number 13.
Item 13, resolution to retroactively authorize the Department of the Environment to accept and expend a $371,000 grant from the Association of Bay Area Governments to perform various activities as part of a Bay Area Regional Energy Network program for the term January 1st, 2015 through December 31st, 2015.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, please call item number 14.
Item 14 is an ordinance to amend the Environment Code to compel persons producing drugs for sale in San Francisco to participate in an approved drug stewardship program for the collection and disposal of unwanted drugs from residential sources, to provide for implementation, enforcement, fees and penalties, and making environmental findings.
President Breed.
Thank you. Colleagues, before you today is legislation that addresses both a public safety and an environmental concern: what we do with leftover medication. Flushing medication down the toilet sends them to the sewage treatment plants that are not designed to remove them, meaning the chemicals end up polluting the bay. Putting drugs in the trash also pose environmental risk, as the chemicals can either leach out of landfills or get pumped to the sewage plants, where, again, they won't be removed. It can seem easier to just close the medicine cabinet and forget about it, which, frankly, many of us do. Unfortunately, that can have the worst consequences of all, as the drugs are often misappropriated by people struggling with addiction, or kids looking for a high, or misused by the elderly who may confuse them with their daily meds. The California Poison Control System states that more than 90% of accidental poisonings happen in the home. Last year, San Franciscans called the Poison Control Center over 4,600 times about pharmaceutical exposures. And in 2010 and 2011, the city saw 225 deaths due to prescription drugs. Nationally, almost 23,000 people died of prescription drug overdoses in 2013. And the CDC states that 15,000 people die every year from prescription painkiller overdoses. That is more than heroin and cocaine combined. So unwanted and expired medications are not just an environmental problem, they can be a public safety risk. We may not be able to prevent every accidental poisoning or remove all chemicals from the bay, but we can do something here in San Francisco to help. This legislation will require drug manufacturers with city oversight to fund and operate full collection programs, just as they do throughout Europe, Colombia, Brazil, and directly to the north and south in Canada and Mexico. Consumers could simply place their old medications in secure drop-off bins in pharmacies or return them by mail, all at no cost and without an increase in drug prices. San Francisco has actually been operating a small drug disposal pilot program for about 3 years. In that time, our pilot has safely collected 23.5 tons of medicine. That's 47,000 pounds of chemicals that would not end up in our bay or in the wrong hands because of this program. Imagine how much more we could collect and properly dispose of if we could include more drop-off locations citywide. The ordinance before you today, colleagues, will provide a long-term, comprehensive, safe medicine disposal program. This is not a new or untested idea. It is an outgrowth of our pilot and is informed by the similar programs in Alameda and King County, Washington. It is also supported by one of the most impressive and diverse coalitions of supporters I've ever seen, including the San Francisco Police Department, the Department of the Environment, the Public Utilities Commission, the Department of Public Health, Recology, the San Francisco Medical Society, representing over 1,500 physicians and medical students, the Dog Pack of San Francisco, the San Francisco Suicide Prevention, Alcohol Justice, the National Coalition of Alcoholism and Other Drug Addictions Bay Area, statewide environmental, retail, and senior groups, including California Product Stewardship Council, the California Retailer Association, Green Cities California, California Against Waste, the California Association of Retired Americans, and national organizations, including National Resources Defense Council, the Clean Water Action, the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse, and the Product Stewardship Institution. And we have a letter of strong support from all 12 of the independent pharmacies that have been participating in the city's pilot program. In considering this issue, we can either side with the environmentalists, the police officers, the doctors, the drug treatment centers, the seniors, and our own city departments, or we can side with the drug companies. We had almost 2.5 hours of testimony on this legislation at committee, so I won't revisit every detail here, but I want to quickly address a few questions I have heard in recent days. First, I know some will say this legislation won't remove all pharmaceuticals from our waters or that it won't stop addiction. I know that. I would never argue this legislation is a cure-all, but I also don't think we should do nothing just because we can't do everything. Would we be better off if those 23 million tons of drugs our pilot program has collected had gone into the bay or the landfill instead? Second, some have asked why don't we fund this program by adding a fee onto retail drug prices. The Department of the Environment explained the rationale for extended producer responsibility, the concept that a company should actually be responsible for the products it creates. I will simply add that this program will cost in the range of $400,000 or $500,000 compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars in sales that drug companies do in this city every year. Third is the question of why is it not mandatory for retailers to participate in the Take Back program? I've been working very closely with major pharmacy operators in the city, including Safeway, Walgreens, Target, CVS, and Kaiser. I am confident they want to and will participate when the programs launch for the same reason the independent pharmacies in our pilot program have. It is a value add for their customers. So will we be able to get 55 drop-off locations citywide as this legislation seeks? I added an amendment requiring our 2 city-run pharmacies to participate. With those 2, plus all 10 police stations and the 13 locations in the pilot, we have 25 locations. We are coming out of the gates with half of the drop-off locations that the program already needs. As we heard in committee, in King County, Washington, 86 pharmacies have already made firm commitments to participate in this program. And per Section 2205B1, the program can use other collection methods if there aren't enough retail locations available. I will not support an amendment to make participation mandatory for retailers. The Department of Environment will do everything possible to ensure retailers sign up and the program succeeds. The California Retailers Association just sent a letter expressing their commitment to keep working with the department on this ordinance after it passes. If for some reason the retailers do not continue acting in good faith, as they absolutely have been, we can always revisit the idea of making it mandatory. Lastly, I want to touch on how the Take Back program will operate. We intentionally left out flexibility in the ordinance for drug manufacturers to determine the most effective and efficient way to operate the programs. My hope is they will set up a third-party LLC funded by manufacturers in amounts proportionate to their sales or company size. The LLC can then directly manage the take-back programs. However manufacturers choose to operate it, the Department of Environment will be there to oversee and insist in every step of the way. It's not our role as legislators to operate or micromanage this program, but to empower the department to lead. And given their success with the pilot and the talent of their ED, Debbie Raphael, I have every confidence the department will succeed. We will create a convenient, safe system for drug disposal. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisor Eric Marr and Supervisor Norman Yee. Also, to many of the folks who actually worked on this legislation, Debbie Raphael, Guillermo Rodriguez, and Maggie Johnson at the Department of Environment. All the stakeholders who have provided feedback, all of our supporters throughout the city and the county, and lastly, to my predecessor, Assemblyman David Chu, for originally carrying the legislation. San Francisco won't back down from protecting our environment or protecting public safety. Now is the time for us to pass this law and make it convenient and safe for San Franciscans to do the right thing with their leftover medication. Colleagues, I hope you will support this legislation today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Breed. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, and thank you, President Breed, for such a detailed summary of the discussion we had at the GAO committee. We had a very lengthy discussion there, and there were actually many questions that were asked, and it was a really good discussion. And I want to thank all the stakeholders that actually showed up for that, that made the discussion last for 2.5 hours. But I wanted also to acknowledge, as you have, Debbie, from the San Francisco Department of Environment, because some of the questions that were asked, if it weren't answered, would be left hanging. And I appreciate that there was a follow-up memo with basically all the answers to many of the questions that were asked, and it was very thorough. And I could see that there shouldn't be any holes left for anybody to criticize that we shouldn't be doing this. Certainly, when I asked for examples of timeline, because some people may be concerned about whether we could do this in the period that we cited in the legislation, it was pretty evident that from Alameda's effort and from Kings Canyon in Washington, that this is really doable. I mean, you cited President Bree. Kings Canyon up in Washington, and they in 3 months they were able to do this. So it didn't take that much time to actually reach out. They had 8 pharmacies already signed up and so forth. So I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody else on my colleagues here will be supporting this also. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to add my name as a co-sponsor.
Okay, colleagues, is there any additional commentary on this item? Okay, seeing none, colleagues, can we take this item same house, same call? Okay, without objection, this ordinance is adopted unanimously on the first reading.
Okay, Madam Clerk. Thanks, colleagues. Madam Clerk, can you please call item number 15?
Item 15 is an ordinance to amend the planning code to permit exceptions from dwelling unit density limits and other requirements of the code when adding dwelling units to existing buildings undergoing seismic retrofit, correcting outdated cross-references in code language, and affirming the CEQA determination by the Planning Department and making the appropriate findings.
Colleagues, can we take this? Oh, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, today before us is legislation that will allow for the addition of accessory dwelling units, also known as in-law units, in buildings that are undergoing either mandatory or voluntary seismic retrofits. This legislation is a win-win for San Francisco. It will provide an incentive to add new, accessible, typically moderate income housing without any public subsidy. and it also will provide an incentive for buildings to undergo seismic retrofit, even if they may not be mandated to do so. Equally important, this builds upon the Castro in-law unit legislation that I authored and that colleagues you passed last year that creates a path for the creation of new rent-controlled units in San Francisco because the legislation provides that if a unit is added into an existing rent-controlled building, it will also be rent-controlled. The legislation has the support of various organizations, including Livable City, the HAC, SPUR, and was endorsed unanimously by the Planning Commission. Colleagues, we know that we're in the midst of a housing crisis. We need more housing in San Francisco, and we need all types of housing. In-law units or accessory dwelling units are the most affordable type of non-subsidized housing. They tend typically to be smaller. They're on the ground level. They're in existing, typically older buildings, and most of the infrastructure is already in place in the building, and so it costs less to produce a unit than it does to create a new unit. They're inherently decentralized, so their impacts on a neighborhood are spread out. We're not talking about large numbers of units being placed in one location. As I noted, various studies have demonstrated that these units tend to be much more affordable than other units, studies out of UC Berkeley, HUD, and AARP. There is, of course, no one solution to our housing crisis, but in-law units and a more flexible approach to in-law units are one piece of the puzzle. This legislation allows owners of properties to add additional accessory dwelling units within the existing building envelope if they're participating in the city's established and well-defined mandatory or voluntary seismic retrofit program. The building, as noted, if it's rent-controlled, the unit will be rent-controlled, and we are continuing to work with the Department of Building Inspections to establish policies and guidelines to make it as easy and smooth as possible for people to be able to add these units within the confines of the building code and other codes. Colleagues, I want to thank everyone who helped with this legislation. I also want to thank Andres Power in my office for his work. And colleagues, I ask for your support.
Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, and I want to acknowledge Supervisor Wiener for his work on this legislation. I just wanted to bring up a point that I'm not going to bring up in this legislation today, but just want to note for the future. I do think that it's important for us to create ways for us to increase density and, of course, new units throughout San Francisco. It certainly is important for our housing supply. That being said, as we provide this valuable new unit space to many of our property owners, I do think it's important to prohibit those uses from short-term rentals. And this was something that came up at Land Use Committee last week. It isn't just pertain to this legislation, but to all additional dwelling units that we are allowing through recent legislation over the last year. I just think that we have to ensure that these units are specifically used for housing only. And I worry that with similar addresses, that it'd be easy to turn these units into full-time bread and breakfast, and that it will not actually ease our housing stock. That's not an amendment that I'm introducing today because I think this is only one slice of additional dwelling units, but it's certainly something that I would like to have further discussion with and continue as our trailing legislation comes back through the Planning Commission back to the full board. And so it's a larger conversation about this type of dwelling units, not specifically to just the one that Supervisor Wiener is introducing today.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Supervisor Wiener for bringing this forward. I just want to associate myself with the comments of Supervisor Kim. I don't think it's appropriate to do it right now, but I do think that as we have trailing legislation on the issue of short-term rentals, that we should consider including a limitation on these types of dwellings. I think that we have yet to fully understand the impact of short-term rentals on our housing stock, and I think that whatever we can do to ensure that housing units are in fact made available for housing and not short-term rentals is an important consideration. So thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to Supervisor Kim and Supervisor Cummings for raising the issue of short-term rentals. Clearly, we want these units to be residential dwelling units, and under the legislation that we passed late last year, like every other dwelling unit, these units will not be able to be permanent short-term rentals. They will have to have a permanent resident living in there under the terms of what we passed. And so whether the unit is an existing 100-year-old apartment building or a single-family home or a new in-law unit or new construction somewhere, we need to make sure people are complying with the laws and that all dwelling units are being used as permanent residential housing units. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Okay, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this ordinance is passed on the first reading unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item 16 is a resolution to approve an agreement to rent units with AGI TMG Housing Partners and to authorize the Director of Planning to execute an agreement in order to implement the Eastern Neighborhoods Rental Incentive Option under Planning Code Section 419.5B for the residential development proposed at 1201 through 1225 Tennessee Street for the period of 30 years.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Again, I just want to point out something that our office will be working on in the future. I think when this came forward to us at Land Use last week, I was really surprised to learn that within Eastern Neighborhoods that we give our developers a rental incentive option within the UMU code of our Eastern Neighborhoods that allows you to further decrease your on-site inclusionary housing from what was already decreased via the Housing Trust Fund back in 2012. These area plans allotted for higher inclusionary housing given the lower cost of land because these neighborhoods have typically been a mix of industrial and other type of mixed uses. Because of that, if you build housing in this area, we ask you to build more affordable housing than less. Via the Housing Trust Fund, we have lowered the number of the mandatory inclusionary units, and then via Eastern Neighborhoods, you can lower it even further via this rental incentive option. Being that this was already in place when these projects were in the pipeline, and of course they would apply because they're eligible, I will be supporting items 16 and 17 today, but I did want to mention that we have asked the City Attorney's Office to draft an amendment to the Eastern Neighborhood that would take out this rental incentive in the future. We need to build as much affordable housing as possible. A reduction has already been allotted through the Housing Trust Fund, and I do believe, given the current housing market, that developers can certainly afford this. We've already reached out to some of the developers as well to let them know that we will be working on this.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Seeing no other names on the roster, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item 17 is a resolution to approve an agreement to rent units with Raintree 2051 3rd Street and to authorize the Director of Planning to execute an agreement to implement the Eastern Neighborhoods Rental Incentive Option under the Planning Code for the residential development proposed at 2051 3rd Street for a period of 30 years.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 18, resolution to authorize the lease and facilities agreement between the city and the Mexican Museum located at 706 Mission Street, which will operate for a term of 66 years at a total base rent of $1.
Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate the members of the Mexican Museum community who I see here today. The resolution before us authorizes lease agreement between the city and the Mexican Museum, approximately 48,000 square feet at the 706 Mission site for a 66-year term for $1. The agreement also includes an option to extend for another 33 years after the initial term. I just wanted to congratulate the group that has made this possible. It has been a very long road with a lot of challenges and obstacles along the way, but this group was incredibly persistent and worked very closely with Millennium Partners, who I also want to acknowledge for their work to make Mexican Museum a reality. This will complete the vision that the city had for the Yerba Buena redevelopment area plan, which included the Museum of African Diaspora, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Jewish Contemporary Museum, and of course the Museum of Modern Art. And it is really exciting that we will have a one-of-a-kind institution that will showcase the complexity and richness of the Latino culture and art throughout the Americas. And I want to recognize OCII, the Department of Real Estate, again, Millennium Partners, and the countless community stakeholders that have helped to make this vision a reality.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Supervisor Kim, and your office for all the work that you have done to move this item forward. I don't want to repeat what the supervisor has said, but many people, many of whom are here in this chamber, have been working on this not for years but decades. And as Supervisor Kim noted, the approval of this lease will set the city well on our way to realizing the vision of the Mexican Museum. It's a very exciting thing. And I know that for Supervisor Avalos and I, we have been working on this since we got on the Board of Supervisors. This is our 7th year, and so it's great to be at this point. I want to thank everyone who has made this possible. And it's, I think, a great victory, not just for the Mexican American and the Latino community, but it's a great victory for all of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam President. And I would also like to add myself as a co-sponsor, which was a complete oversight that I wasn't already. And yes, I want to thank all the parties who were involved to really make this happen. I've been a big fan of the Mexican Museum ever since I first arrived to San Francisco in 1989. I went to the Fort Mason site frequently, just fell in love with the museum. And I even have some of their artwork hanging in my office right now. So maybe it's time to swap that out for new pieces to come through. But I just want to say congratulations, and I know it's a lot of hard work. I'd like to thank Millennium as well for thinking strongly about community benefits like having the Mexican Museum at this site. And it's a great location, as Supervisor Kim mentioned. All around there are great sites to attract people to the neighborhood and to showcase the great art of the world and art that's here in San Francisco. So just congratulations, and look forward to seeing the new site when it's done.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Congratulations. It's been a long time coming, and really excited to see this day where we're moving forward with the museum and adding it to some amazing museums in the museum district down at Yerba Buena. So congratulations to you all, and thank you for being here today. Madam colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Okay, with that, we are going to move forward with item number 19.
Item 19 was considered by the Land Use and Transportation Committee at a regular meeting on Monday, March 9th, and was forwarded to the board as a committee report. It's a resolution to impose interim zoning controls for large residential projects in RH1, RH2, and RH3 zoning districts for an 18-month period within an established perimeter by Market Street, Clayton Street, Ashbury Street, Clifford Terrace, Roosevelt Way, Museum Way, the eastern property line of Assessor's Parcel Block number 2620, the eastern property line of Assessor's Parcel Block number 2619, and Douglas Street, and requiring a conditional use authorization for the following building types: any residential development on a vacant parcel that will result in total residential square footage exceeding 3,000 gross square feet, any new residential development on a developed parcel that will increase the existing gross square footage in excess of 3,000 feet and by more than 75% without increasing the existing legal unit count, or more than 100% if increasing the existing legal unit count, and for residential development that results in greater than 55% total lot coverage, and making the appropriate findings.
Okay, Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, these interim zoning controls that we're considering today would apply to the Corona Heights and Corbett Heights neighborhoods, helping to bring some order to a troubling trend that we're seeing of transforming smaller or regular-sized existing single-family homes and replacing them with massive single-family homes, not really adding new housing, but turning smaller single-family homes into very large single-family homes and covering up the bulk of the lot in the process. The legislation has the support of all of the neighborhood associations in the area, Corporate Heights Neighbors, Castro-Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association, and the DuBose Triangle Neighborhood Association. The current situation in the neighborhood is becoming chaotic. There are a number of projects that have been subject to discretionary review, or that it appears that they will be subject to discretionary review. They're going to the Planning Commission anyway. This legislation will not ban any of these projects. It does not place a moratorium on any project. It simply substitutes a conditional use process for discretionary review process, so that we know from the beginning what the process is in terms of moving towards a Planning Commission hearing. The legislation does not apply to modest home renovations or smaller additions to homes. It applies when a building is being turned into a dramatically larger building. The legislation of course, simply applies conditional use, which is a well-established process in San Francisco. The legislation will provide an incentive not to kill development. That's not the intent here, and that won't be the result, but rather for all parties to work together to shape specific projects so that they are, in fact, positive additions to the neighborhood. Legislation would apply to any expansion of a home or building that will exceed 3,000 square feet if the expansion results in the home being expanded by more than 75%, or if you're adding a unit by more than 100%. So if the project is less than 3,000 square feet, these controls do not apply. If the project exceeds 3,000 square feet, but the expansion is less than either 75% or 100%, the controls don't apply. This applies to large buildings that where we are seeing a dramatic expansion of the size of the building. Colleagues, the legislation, I think, makes a lot of sense. These are interim controls, and it will provide us with a period to sit down and think about what are the ideal permanent controls in the area. I do want to address some communications we've heard about this legislation somehow being anti-housing, which is absolutely not the case. As I noted, this legislation is not a moratorium, it's not a ban, it does not prohibit any kind of project. These projects are already, for the most part, going to the Planning Commission through discretionary review. This will simply provide that they will go to the Planning Commission through a conditional use. I also want to note that this neighborhood this area, this zone, starts a mere 3 blocks from Castro and Market. For those who have been in Upper Market recently, you will know that between Castro Street and Octavia Street, we're seeing about 1,000 units of housing either that have been added or that are in the process of being added. Upper Market has been absorbing a significant amount of new housing, and this zone starts a mere 3 blocks from that housing. So for anyone who suggests that this is about somehow preventing the addition of housing in this area, that is not the case. A lot of housing is being included in this neighborhood. In addition, the Castro in-law legislation that we passed last year includes the bulk of this zone. So we basically upzoned this area, Corbett Heights, Corona Heights, so that people can add accessory dwelling units going 1 unit above the zoning. This neighborhood did not object to that. Indeed, there was a lot of support for that legislation. So this is not a situation where we have people who are simply opposing development, opposing the addition of new housing. This is a neighborhood that has embraced new housing, but turning a regular-sized home into a dramatically larger, massive single-family home is not adding new housing. Colleagues, we need to add new housing in the city. We also need to make sure that as that housing is added, it's done in a way that is respectful of our neighborhoods. The conditional use process already applies to many forms of housing development in San Francisco throughout our city, and it makes sense to apply it here. Colleagues, I ask for your support. I also want to thank, again, Andres Power in my office for his work with the community and with the planning department in putting together these controls. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I want to thank Supervisor Wiener for bringing this item forward, and I am very happy to support this item today. I think that it's important, the clarification that Supervisor Wiener made, I think it's important that when you have these kinds of interim controls, whether you call them a moratorium, a pause, a conditional use, whatever the tool that's used, there are individuals who try to label that as being anti-housing. And I think that Supervisor Wiener properly noted that these kinds of interim controls are not anti-housing. There was an email that I received, I think all of us received, from someone criticizing what's being proposed because, in their view, as currently written, the legislation could block opportunities for new housing, such as unit additions, co-housing. This individual sees any kind of control or limitation as disincentivizing an opportunity to build additional units of housing in any neighborhood, and they don't want that. But as Supervisor Wiener noted, there are neighborhoods that have seen a lot of housing production, a lot of construction, that nonetheless, notwithstanding the fact that they have embraced that construction, believe that it's important for purposes of protecting the character of their neighborhood to establish interim controls. And what was really striking about what's being proposed is how the comments in support of this measure are comments that could very well come out of my district, and I'll read you some of the things that we heard. Someone wrote, "We have long believed that the residents of a community should have a voice when development or other changes are proposed which would significantly impact neighborhood character." That's from the Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association. Someone said, "I own a house in Corona Heights and urge the Board of Supervisors to adopt permanent controls that will preserve the character of this charming, affordable neighborhood. We shouldn't continue to erode our stock of affordable housing." Then someone said, "My daughter grew up in this house and now rents it from me. I'm grateful to be able to provide an affordable place for my daughter to live. There are enough luxury condominiums being built in all parts of the city. Diversity is an important ingredient for a city to thrive." A resident of Corona Heights. Those comments, very similar comments, almost identical, have been made by residents of my district, and specifically residents of the Mission, that have proposed their own interim controls for purposes of protecting the character of their neighborhood. And I hope that as we consider giving Corona Heights the ability to have control over their own destiny in deciding what goes into a neighborhood, I also hope that we recognize that it's not just Corona Heights, but other neighborhoods that need the same consideration. If it's good for Corona Heights, it should also be good for the Mission and other parts of the city to have the same opportunity to provide interim controls. Because while the issue in Corona Heights may be monster homes, in neighborhoods like the Mission, the issue is affordable housing. That is the reality that we're facing, and I believe that we have a responsibility to empower each neighborhood to have a say in its own future. That, to me, is what this proposal is about. And as we pass this proposal, which I hope we pass, I also hope that we create a precedent for giving other neighborhoods the opportunity to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Bree. I guess through the President, I need some clarification. I was a little confused with this only because there seems to be overlaps in the area for different zoning controls. So, and I just didn't have the chance to look at the map, and I wasn't on the land use to follow this closely. I just happened to look at the agenda over the weekend and said, "Oh my goodness, which one is this?" And it's the same author. So my question really is, and there was some clarification. There might be some overlap, but which of these zoning controls would you be using, or the city would be using? For instance, the question I had in my mind, if it's a vacant lot, and there's not a whole lot of vacant lots, but let's say this vacant lot, and you're allowing even an R1 to be R2, basically with an in-law, and the in-law is, I don't know, 900 square feet, then 2,100 square feet of regular, for one more unit, would almost put you over to 3,000 square feet. So it seems like that's not a monster housing to me. So was there any consideration with those type of situation in this?
Okay, so Supervisor Weiner, you would like to respond to this?
Oh, sure. Through the president, Supervisor Yee. So if you have a 2,100 square foot unit, and let's say you add 1,000 square feet to it for an additional unit, that would not be covered by these controls, because when you're adding a new unit, not only do you have to go over 3,000 square feet, but you have to more than double the size of the building. And if it's a single-family home, not only do you have to increase the size of the single-family home to more than 3,000 square feet, but you have to increase it by more than 75%. So you can have a situation where you have say a 2,000 square foot home, and you're increasing it to 3,400 square feet, and this would not be triggered. We intentionally made it so it only captured the truly significant expansions. And again, it's not a moratorium, it's not a ban, it is simply providing for a conditional use.
So let me clarify my question. On a vacant lot where there's no home, I don't know if there's any vacant lots, but if there were a vacant lot and you wanted to build 1,000 square foot in-law and a 2,100 square foot resident, that'd be over the limit.
So this neighborhood, there's some, it's a very interesting neighborhood in many different ways. And one way is that we have something called through lots, where you have a single parcel of land that starts at one street and goes back to another street, say from State Street to Ord Court or something like that. And the building pattern was that they would build a home on one side of the lot, but not the other side. It would remain as green space, as essentially rear yard space. And so there's been a trend of subdividing those lots to build on both. And that's, I believe, the bulk of the actual vacant lots. And if someone wanted to build a building on there greater than 3,000 square feet, you can do up to 3,000 with no conditional use. You can still get DR'd. But if it's over 3,000 square feet, you would need to seek a conditional use, again, which applies to many forms of housing in San Francisco, but would apply in those kind of situations, but only if you're building more than 3,000 square feet. And so if it were an R2, and there's a lot of R2 in this area, and you were building a 2-unit building, and they were both 1,400 or 1,500 square foot units, you would not trigger the conditional use. It was only if they would be very, very large.
Okay, Mr. Supervisor Yee, does that clarify the issue for you at this time?
Yeah, and it was more for clarification. It wasn't not support this. I was not going to not support it, so it was just for clarification.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, and having responded to Supervisor Yee's question, I do want to respond to Supervisor Campos's remarks. And I agree that in any neighborhood, it's important for the community to have a voice, and that's what the conditional use process is for. The conditional use process guarantees that the community will have a voice, and that's what we're trying to do here, that if you're going to have a dramatic expansion of a home will have a conditional use and the community will have a voice. No one in Corona Heights or Corbett Heights that I'm aware of was requesting a ban on new housing development in Corona and Corbett Heights. No one was asking for a moratorium. No one was saying don't add anything new here. They simply wanted conditional use. And that is a very different thing than what I have heard. And again, I just know what I've read. I haven't been privy to every conversation in terms of what's being requested in the mission, in terms of a moratorium on the building of new market-produced housing. And if I have misinterpreted what that proposal is, then I'm happy to have that clarified, but that is what I have read. Not requesting a conditional use, requesting a moratorium, so no more of that type of housing production. Those projects in the mission that I believe are at issue are already, to my knowledge, subject to conditional use. Whether you're building an upper market or in the mission or anywhere else, when you're building more than a small project, when you're building a project that has a number of units in it, it will trigger the square footage that you are required to have a conditional use. So the projects at issue in the mission, as far as I know, already have to go through conditional use. What is being requested in the mission is not conditional use, which no one objects to, and we already have it, but an actual moratorium and a ban on the building of new market-produced housing. And so that is a very, very different thing. Had neighbors come to me in Corona or Corbett Heights and said, we want a ban or a moratorium on new development in our neighborhood, I would have said, I respect your view, but I respectfully decline. I would not be sponsoring those controls. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that distinction and not to simply say, well, because we're approving controls in one neighborhood, that means any controls that anyone wants in any neighborhood, no matter how extreme, we have to just adopt those. I don't think that's the case. I think we take it case by case and we see what makes sense.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I hope that those who are paying attention to these issues understand that, yes, it is a case-by-case issue. But at the end of the day, those of us who are here may try to differentiate things based on technicalities all we want. Bottom line is that here you have two neighborhoods that are trying to place limits on the kind of development that goes into those neighborhoods. The difference actually between the two neighborhoods right now in terms of where Corona Heights is and where the mission is that we in my office have yet to actually introduce a formal proposal for the mission, and yet there has been opposition already to something that hasn't even been presented. But the reality is that in each case, neighbors want to slow down a certain type of development. In the case of Corona Heights, they want to slow down what they perceive to be monster developments, monster housing that's inconsistent with the character of that neighborhood. In the mission, people want to slow down the development of luxury housing. And you may try to differentiate it because each one is unique in its own form, but it's driven by the same objective, the same goal, which is to protect the character of the neighborhood. And my point is that whatever the tool that the individual neighborhood wants to utilize, it is appropriate for each neighborhood to want to actually have a say in what development should look like. That is the point, and I stand by that point, and I hope that when the issue of what happens in neighborhoods like the Mission comes up before this Board of Supervisors, that we remember what we're doing here today, because it is, at the end of the day, driven by the same objective of protecting the character of these neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On item 19, Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Mar, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner?
Aye.
Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen?
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. There are 11 ayes.
This resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Supervisor Kim is first up to introduce new business.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I am introducing a hearing and a resolution today. First, the hearing. As many of you know, we have been talking a lot about fires here in San Francisco over the last couple of weeks. Most people do not realize that 8 out of 10 deaths in fire occur in home. Fires are also fast, as many of you already know. They can go from a tiny flame to total destruction in as little as 3 minutes. The fact is that fire sprinklers can contain and even extinguish a fire in less time than it would take the fire department to arrive on the scene. They can provide you also with the precious extra time that you might need to escape the building safely if the fire grows larger. Nationally, more than 4,000 people lose their lives to fire every year, with 85% of these with 85% of these deaths caused by fires in residential structures. Every year, almost 16,000 men, women, and children are also injured. The loss of life, risk of injury isn't just for residents. Our firefighters are also at risk of serious injury and even death every time they walk into a building structure under fire. The beginning of 2015 has been a terrible one for many of our fellow San Franciscans due to fire. In the first 2 months of 2015 alone, there are 4 separate fires, one in the Mission, the Tenderloin, Alamo Square Park, and the Castro District. These fires left more than 110 people homeless and caused about $13 million in estimated damage and tragically took the life of one of our residents. Following these fires, Supervisor Campos and my office has been working closely with the fire department, the Department of Building Inspection, community advocates, and apartment owners about how to prevent the unnecessary loss of life, livelihood, and property when a fire strikes. Even one life is too many to lose to a fire when we actually have a tool in place that has been tested and proven to save lives and homes, and these are residential sprinklers. Fire alarms and smoke detectors are absolutely essential, but they can't put out fires. Between 1989 and 2002, more than 1,700 single-room occupancy units were destroyed by fires in San Francisco, prompting then-Supervisor Gavin Newsom to sponsor legislation requiring the installation of automatic sprinkler systems in residential hotels in the common area. Since its passage and full implementation, there has been only one SRO hotel damaged, with all tenants displaced due to the fire. That hotel was the Park Hotel, now renamed the Negev, at 1040 Folsom, which we discovered later had illegally not installed the sprinklers prior to the 2011 fire. It's too easy to let tragedy strike and then fade from our memories. We need to take action that we know can possibly save lives and homes and our local businesses. Firefighting experts maintain that sprinkler systems are simply the best line of defense against a blaze and have stated repeatedly that you are significantly less likely to die in a fire if your residence is equipped with automatic fire sprinklers. Especially in a city that understands the devastation that an earthquake can cause, and even more by the fire post the quake, we need to discuss and implement these life-saving policies before another tragedy strikes. Therefore, I am calling with Supervisor David Campos a hearing on residential sprinklers and look forward to working closely with the San Francisco Fire Department, Department of Building Inspection, our residential property owners, and of course the community to fully understand the very confusing regulatory framework that currently exists and the gaps in coverage when it comes to sprinkler requirements in our residential buildings. Second, I am introducing a resolution today with Supervisor Marr and Supervisor Campos calling on the administration of City College to develop a specific plan for the Civic Center campus so that students and community members can understand the timeline of the campus building retrofitting and when the campus will reopen. The resolution further asks that City College provide temporary classrooms in the Central City Tenderloin neighborhood area for all classes that have been displaced by this closure. Earlier this year, the Civic Center campus of City College of San Francisco closed suddenly due to an emergency seismic safety concern the Friday before classes were scheduled to begin. Many of the students did not find out about the closure until they walked in for their first class and saw the sign posted on the building door. The campus primarily served our ESL, English as a Second Language, students, and the class offerings also provided a vital service for many of our large immigrant communities. The campus also offered a popular non-credit computer class to the surrounding Tenderloin community. These classes help to address the digital divide, which continues to challenge our low-income residents, particularly those in the Central City area. Having a Central City campus is essential to providing educational opportunities for working-class families as a way to help people build their lives and prepare for further training and education. Over 571 students from District 6 were enrolled at the Civic Center campus in the fall of last year. I've heard that as many as a third of students were unable to continue their education, either because they could not afford the cost of transit to another campus far away, or they could not fit the commute time into their work schedules as they balance family and other obligations. Most of the students that I met are working full-time to support themselves while pursuing higher education, or a language class, or a skill set education. It's important that City College do what it can to help our dedicated San Francisco residents in receiving the best education possible. While CCSF initially announced that the classes were only postponed until February 2nd to give time to identify temporary classes, they still have not identified these classrooms, and so many students are in a limbo. A diverse group of community stakeholders, including La Voz Latina, Glide Church, Community Housing Partnership, United Players, Senior Disability Action Network, is calling for the 750 Eddy campus to reopen as quickly as possible and to find temporary classrooms in the neighborhood for all classes that were disrupted by the closure. I'm looking forward to the update from City College on this matter during the hearing that Supervisor Marr called for last week, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, and thanks to Supervisor Kim for introducing that. I also wanted to acknowledge that besides her great policy work and representing her district, I was really pleased to see in the Chronicle last week that our colleague, Supervisor Jane Kim, is acknowledged the top reader choice of fashionable people in the city. And I think I wanted to say that they say that she's extremely stylish. She uses power colors. I'm watching very closely. And also well-fitting suits and dresses. And they point out your incredible shoe collection as well. But congratulations, Supervisor. Also, today is important for a number of us that have been fighting against diabetes and for the public health. I call it round 2 against big soda in San Francisco. Props to our community and public health coalition. I see Dr. John Ma back there, OpenTruth.org and Shape Up SF and the broad coalitions that have been fighting for a healthier future for our children and communities. Today I'm really proud to be introducing one of a suite of pieces of legislation with Supervisors Cohen and Wiener and others that will help reduce the consumption of sugary drinks and to fight the diabetes epidemic and obesity epidemic in our city. As you know, last November, 56% of voters in San Francisco agreed that we must do much more as a city to reduce access to harmful sugary beverages like sodas and energy drinks. Also, some of you might know also that our hospitals from CPMC to Kaiser and Dignity Health are already implementing phasing out of sugary beverages in the vending machines and in some cafeterias as well, already acknowledging the tipping point that's happening in communities where hospitals, cities like Berkeley and San Francisco and others are acknowledging the harm and the impacts on a generation of young people in our city and throughout the country. I also wanted to say that announced by OpenTruth.org and others, Burger King quietly announced today that they're dropping sodas from their kids' meals, and they're following McDonald's, Wendy's, Subway, and Arby's, and we're hoping to see many other fast food companies and restaurants dropping the sodas and other harmful beverages and really providing more milk and other alternatives in their children's meals. So I think San Francisco has shown that we're in the lead, and today's suite of pieces of legislation is a part of that. Also, In our city, when we've looked very closely at the data, we know that 1 in 3 San Francisco youth will become diabetic in their lifetime. 1 in 3 of our youth will become diabetic in their lifetime. But when you look at African Americans and Chicanos and Latinos, 1 in 2, or 1/2 of the populations, will develop type 2 diabetes in their lifetimes. Our Budget and Legislative Analyst's Office reported last year that sugary drinks in San Francisco cost us as a city $50 million, and the city government up to $26 million a year. So there's a tremendous economic negative impact by the overconsumption of sugary beverages. We're also continuing this fight against big soda and for the health of our communities in 2015 with our coalition with legislation that we think will make our communities healthier and better informed about the risks posed by big soda and the overconsumption of sugary beverages, including energy drinks. The legislation I'm introducing will prohibit the use of city funds from city departments, contractors, and grantees from purchasing sugary drinks. It doesn't ban vendors or the selling of sugary drinks or private parties from bringing them, but it does limit the city and its departments and its contractors that do business with the city from spending public money to consume sugary beverages. We can't, in good faith, know the terrible harm that these drinks cause and then allow them to be handed out in children's programs or to encourage employees to drink them. I'm also following up with new legislation also that will help track the number of sugary drink retailers to provide the Department of Public Health, our staff in the Department of Public Health, more information about the sale of these harmful products. Lastly, I'm introducing a resolution to formally endorse Senator Bill Monning's Senate Bill 203. Senate Bill 203, as we voted as this board about a year ago, this SB 203 would require warning labels on sugar-sweetened beverages sold in California to inform consumers of the risks posed by Big Soda's products. This legislation is essentially identical to last year's SB 1000, which this board supported unanimously last year. I'm also proud to co-sponsor with my colleagues Supervisor Cohen and Weiner various ordinances that will limit advertising of sugary drinks on city property and place warning labels on advertisements. And I look forward to advancing all of these policies with this board and urge your collective support. I wanted to just, again, thank our city's public health leaders, Shape Up SF Coalition, Healthy Food Access organizers for their inspiring work and the examples they set for me and other policymakers in our city. If you want more information, opentruthnow.org. It's opentruthnow.org. Thanks. The rest I'll submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Today, colleagues, I am actually submitting a formal city attorney request to draft legislation. Typically, I do not do this, but I felt that this was a very important way to really start formally a large dialogue that we will be embarking upon with the rest of the community, the rest of the city. There was a lot of talk earlier in this meeting about housing and how it is that we accommodate more people to be able to live here in our great city. And I think that we need to look at all solutions. And so one of the solutions that we are very interested in looking at and have been discussing with the planning department for probably the past year or half a year now has to do with the idea of backyard cottages. We are asking our city attorney to draft legislation to amend our planning code. Currently, it allows for our planning code currently allows for the construction of facilities that are 10 by 10, mostly for garden tool storage. And so we are looking at expanding that regulation to allow for the construction of accessory dwelling units in rear yards. Again, we feel that all solutions should be looked at, especially in the Sunset District. We do have many, many homes that have large backyards that could accommodate such facilities. And we will be embarking upon a conversation with the entire city about what specifics this proposal will contain, such as what size it should be, still allowing for a rear yard exception, et cetera. And so I really look forward to working with the rest of my colleagues and community members in figuring out how we move forward with this legislation. So the rest I submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I'm introducing 2 items. The first is an ordinance landmarking the Swedish American Hall on Market Street near Sanchez. If you've not seen it before, it's really a beautiful, majestic building that is fell into partial disuse and is now being revitalized and is going to just be better and better moving forward with live music and a cafe and food services. And our first step is landmarking the building, and so it's an exciting step for the neighborhood and for this property. I also am introducing today legislation as briefly described by Supervisor Marr, and I want to thank Supervisors Marr and Cohen for co-sponsoring it. Legislation to require health warnings to be placed on all advertisements, stationary advertisements like billboards and other signs for sodas and sugary beverages. The warning will read as follows, quote, "Warning, drinking beverages with added sugar contributes to obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay." This is a message from the City and County of San Francisco, end quote. We know that health warnings are an important public health strategy. They have worked very well in the cigarette context. All cigarette advertising has to contain a prominent warning informing consumers about some of the diseases that cigarettes cause, and the same should happen here. This legislation nicely complements the legislation pending in Sacramento that will require an identical health warning on the actual containers in which these drinks are sold. We know that these drinks are fueling the explosion of type 2 diabetes and other health problems. We absolutely, as a society, need to reduce consumption, and this legislation will help us to do that. It applies to any paper, poster, or billboard ads posted on any structure, whether it's a transit shelter, an arena, a building, or a vehicle. It does not include circulated materials like newspapers, magazines, or periodicals because those tend to be produced outside of the city, and it would be challenging or illegal for us to require that warnings be placed on them. The size of the warnings will have to be at least 20% of the ad space, which is the standard required by the FDA on tobacco health warnings. The legislation will be enforced by the Department of Public Health. And the goal of the legislation, of course, is to have compliance and not to collect any fines for violations. We especially do not want to cause any undue burdens on our small retailers or any of our retailers. So the legislation explicitly states that no retailer can be subject to any fine without at least a 30-day warning from the Department of Public Health. So if a DPH inspector goes into a store and sees an ad without the proper warning, the inspector will simply inform the store owner that it needs to be corrected within 30 days. Of significance, the warning applies only to advertisements posted after the effective date of the legislation. So people are not going to have to tear down existing billboards and signs and replace them, which would in fact be a burden. So this will gradually over time phase in the health warnings on our billboards, signs, etc. There is no one approach that is going to help address the growing healthcare problem that sugary drinks are creating in our country. We're going to have to take various approaches, and one of those approaches is education and making sure that consumers are receiving good information about the impacts of these drinks, and this will help move us in that direction. I want to thank Jeff Cretin in my office for working on this legislation, as well as Peter Lauterborn and Yo-Yo Chan for their work in Supervisors Marr and Cohen's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Today I'll be introducing two items. One of them will be a hearing to receive public testimony on the impact and feasibility of extending the child care impact fee to residential development. The second item, it's regarding the Balboa Reservoir site. So in recent months, I have heard from my constituents concerning the city's process when it comes to the development of the site. Every person I have talked to seems to agree to at least one issue. We need more information. While I appreciate the efforts that have gone into outreaching to the neighbors to date, I believe we need to do much better a much better job reaching out to every neighbor and every stakeholder. This 18-acre parcel of land will be one of the bigger developments in the western side of San Francisco, outside of Park Merced, larger than the combination of the 3 development sites on Ocean Avenue, larger than the townhouses, the 184 townhouses that are going up on Brotherhood Way, larger than the proposed and approved buildings on what we call the Overlook project. So this is really a big deal for our neighborhood and probably for the western side of San Francisco. I mean, there's hardly any development. It seems like it's all happening in District 7. So therefore, today I am introducing legislation to create a Balboa Reservoir Citizens Advisory Committee. While I understand the reservoir is a valuable resource, I believe it is very important that residents, businesses, and education institutions impacted by the site should be getting more information from the city about the project every step of the way and are given away a say in the decisions that are made. I envision a Citizens Advisory Committee to be a place where everyone can get the most updated information that the city has and have the necessary conversations about the development on the site. The CAC will have 9 members that represent the neighborhoods, businesses, and educational institutions around the reservoir. The CAC will be tasked to advise the Planning Department and the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development on issues centered around transportation and parking, open space and other community benefits, housing options and affordability, the interaction of the project with City College, good neighbor policies to serve existing residents and small businesses around the site. Finally, I believe that this is an opportunity for us to envision something very, very positive for our neighborhood. And I believe that the only way to achieve that is by having a constant flow of information and to have real neighborhood input. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I have 2 items for introduction. One is new security contract for the MTA. It's a 3-year contract, and this is actually the second bite at creating a contract for security for the MTA, but I think they have done it right, and hopefully that will meet your full approval. And the next item I have for introduction is a resolution that follows up on the Controller's recent report on strategies for helping homeowners with at-risk mortgages. The report identified 3,000 loans in the city that are underwater or near underwater. These loans are predominantly in the southern and southeastern neighborhoods of San Francisco. One of the few successful strategies for helping struggling homeowners is the programs where Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, have been able to purchase at-risk mortgages from banks, HUD, and Fannie and Freddie Mac. These CDFIs then restructure the mortgages to eliminate the predatory lending features and help families to stay in their homes. This resolution expresses the intent of the board to negotiate with the banks to sell more of these at-risk mortgages to these CDFIs. The Controller's report says these programs pose low financial risks and low administrative burdens to the city. While the Controller has questions about how many San Francisco loans these types of programs will be able to help, I hope that we can work with other cities to pressure the banks to sell more of these at-risk loans. The city councils in Richmond, California, and Newark, New Jersey have passed similar resolutions, and I have been in contact with officials in both of these cities about working together with them. This resolution also urges our mayor to join us in this effort. I hope that Mayor Lee can work with his fellow mayors as part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors to recruit other cities to help us pressure the banks to sell these at-risk loans to community-serving community development financial institutions. The rest I'll submit. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Last week on Wednesday, at the request of Supervisor Farrell, and I believe Supervisor Christensen as well, we had a very enlightening hearing at the Budget Committee to get a presentation on the Planning Department's efforts to enforce the short-term rental law, the so-called Airbnb law. And it was a very informative presentation, and I have to give a great deal of kudos to the Planning Department staff who were very forthcoming. And the long and short of it, if those of you who watched this hearing, is that what we heard from our Planning Department staff was essentially that as currently written, this law is unenforceable. It's interesting, a number of issues were raised, but one of the fascinating things is that over the course of discussing this legislation, we have heard from hundreds, if not thousands, of folks who are engaging in short-term rentals, the unfortunate thing is that as was noted at the hearing by the Apartment Association, which I don't necessarily always agree with, there were more people in that room coming to testify about this law than actually had signed up for the law itself. When you look at the issue of enforcement, I think the only thing that I can say in terms of describing the situation is what a mess. What a mess. And one of the problems with enforcement, as was noted by the Planning Department staff, is that they simply lack the data and the information they need from companies like Airbnb to be able to properly enforce the law. We heard from our staff at Planning that they had requested that data from Airbnb and other short-term rental platforms, and that Airbnb essentially told them that they had to probably subpoena that information if they wanted it. So today I am requesting that our city attorney draft an ordinance that would enable the Planning Department to get the information they need to properly enforce this law. The data that this ordinance would require be provided by these short-term rentals platforms is the following, which is what our staff at Planning Department has requested. The addresses of all listings that do not include a registration number, the number of nights hosted and non-hosted for each registered unit by registration number. I believe that without this information, as was explained to us by Planning Department staff, what this law will be is essentially an unenforceable piece of legislation. And I think that whatever differences we may have about the Airbnb and short-term rental legislation, I think that we can all be in agreement that when we pass a law by this body, that we want that law to be enforced. This data is critical for a number of reasons, as I mentioned, to help our Planning Department staff in their enforcement of the law. Second, it's also important in terms of understanding the impact of this new short-term rental law when it comes to our housing stock. And the other thing is that the thing about enforcement is that given the nature of this industry, without information to verify whether or not the rules are being followed, enforcement is simply impossible. The last thing that I would note is that while we know that this ordinance will address the issue of providing information as we move forward, we're also continue to look at the issue of making sure that the information that has been requested by the department, which is information that is retrospective, that information be provided. I hope that we don't have to go down the path of having to subpoena Airbnb and other platforms to get this information, but we in my office are keeping that possibility open so that we give our staff the tools they need to enforce this law. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I have just a very few brief remarks. I just want to talk about the legislation that I'm introducing today. It's legislation to ban the advertising of sugar-sweetened beverages on all city property. And you've heard a little bit of the remarks earlier today from my colleagues who are also co-sponsors, Supervisor Wiener as well as Supervisor Marr. I just want to let you all know that there is room on this roster for other co-sponsors, for those of you that like to join in this with us. This legislation is really simple. It's actually modeled off of a prohibition that already applies to alcohol and tobacco products here in San Francisco. So it's pretty straightforward and clean. I fundamentally believe that we should be adhering to the standards we hold for alcohol and tobacco to sugary beverages, a product that is also slowly killing us. In 2013 alone, beverage companies spent $866 million advertising sugary sweetened beverages, which is 4 times as much as they spent advertising pure fruit juice and water. The beverage industry spends millions of dollars every year to target low-income and minority communities, which also happens to be some of the communities with the highest risks of type 2 diabetes, which of course includes specifically the southeastern part of San Francisco. And let me tell you, this is by no coincidence. According to a 2011 report by the Yale Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, African American youth see 80 to 90% more ads for sugary drinks than their white counterparts. And this is just not acceptable. Our youth are also being heavily targeted. In 2013, the beverage company spent more to promote events and sponsorships specifically aimed at youth than companies in any other food category. This prohibition on soda advertising will help us to move closer to bridging these health inequities. Our community, particularly our future, which are the youth, deserve to grow up in an environment where they are exposed to messages that promote health and not harmful substances. Thank you, Supervisors Wiener and Marr, for your co-sponsorship of this item, and I recognize that there's plenty of opportunity for others to join, but there's always room for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I'm introducing legislation formally that I mentioned a few weeks ago, and that is to introduce the ban on smokeless tobacco at all of our athletic fields here in the city of San Francisco. The effects of smokeless tobacco, as well as all other forms of tobacco, are clear. Prolonged use can cause cancer and even death among individuals and can be disastrous to our communities and certainly to our children. And I do believe it's time to show that tobacco in any form should no longer claim the lives of our family and friends. The legislation is actually very simple and states that chewing tobacco is not allowed on athletic fields across our city. It will not affect or dictate what individuals do outside or off our athletic fields. Yes, it will apply to AT&T Park, but no, it will not apply anywhere off of our fields. It has a very similar structure to our city's landmark anti-tobacco and smoking ordinance and has similar requirements and penalty structures in place. And in order to allow coaches and teams and individuals to prepare for this, it will not take effect until January 2016. Right now, 15% of high school boys across our country use smokeless tobacco. And each year, over 500,000 new children ages 12 to 17 try smoking tobacco for the first time. This is a real issue that is affecting millions of children across the U.S. and certainly here in San Francisco. While chewing tobacco has been historically linked to sports, and baseball in particular, it doesn't need to be part of our future. And I want to reiterate that my motivation for this, as someone who used chewing tobacco back in the day, is that I'm doing this for my kids. My wife and I are blessed to have 3 young children, 2 young boys, one of which is already playing baseball on a team that I'm coaching. And I do not want our children's future or the future of any other child growing up here in San Francisco to be a future with chewing tobacco. No more. And I hope, colleagues, that we can continue to have this conversation and all of us as city leaders can step up on this issue, and certainly want to single out and thank Supervisor Marr for his co-sponsorship of this and his leadership on all of these other issues beforehand. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Weiner, you asked to be re-referred.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I neglected to mention one thing, and that is to update you on a hearing we held yesterday at the Land Use Committee. Supervisor Cohen and Supervisor Kim were there and had the pleasure of hearing our double parking hearing, which I'll be honest was highly discouraging, and I hope, colleagues, you will join me in putting pressure on the MTA and the police department to actually enforce our double parking laws. A year and a half ago, we held an oversight hearing on double parking, and as I think we all know, double parking is pretty rampant in the city. It's a bit of the Wild West. There is very little enforcement outside of the downtown core. Double parking has significant negative impacts on our transportation system, whether it's a delivery truck or a cab or a ride share or just a private automobile. One double parked car can cause a multi-block traffic jam. One double parked car can block and even shut down an entire Muni line. And one double parked car can cause a large number of bikes in a bike lane to have to veer out into traffic because they can't get through the bike lane. Indeed, it seems that as we add more bike lanes, many drivers appear to view these bike lanes as just an additional parking lane. And there is very, very little enforcement. So we held a hearing a year and a half ago, and the MTA committed to the Land Use Committee that it would improve and increase enforcement of double parking. Well, we held our follow-up hearing 18 months later, yesterday, and at that hearing, do you want to know what we learned? We learned that in 2014, the MTA issued fewer double parking tickets than it issued in 2013. To be clear, 2013 was a small number of tickets, so we're not talking about some sort of peak and it went down, and it went from bad to even worse. According to the MTA, the reason for the decline in the number of double parking tickets was because it didn't have the staffing to do it. So we've asked the MTA to come back within 60 days with a plan for what it's going to do to actually have the capacity to enforce double parking. We are growing as a city. Our streets are becoming more and more congested every day with cars, with bikes, with pedestrians, with trucks, with every kind of vehicle. And we need to make sure we're appropriately managing our transportation system. I'm a big fan of the recent effort to enforce against people who are blocking the box. We need to make sure we're doing a better job enforcing against double parking. And so this is something we're going to be keeping a close eye on because the situation has to improve. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Madam President, there are no other names on the roster. That concludes the introduction of new business.
Okay, at this time, Madam Clerk, can you please read public comment?
At this time, the public may comment generally for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, to include the policy discussion between the mayor and the board, and the minutes yet to be approved, and items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar, items 22 through 26. Public comment is not allowed on items that have previously been subject to public comment at a board committee. Pursuant to the board's rules, direct your remarks to the board as a whole, not to individual supervisors, nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify. If you would like a document to be displayed on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and then remove the document when you would like the screen to return to live coverage of the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First speaker, please. Sir, there's another microphone that
God bless you, supervisors in the city, county of San Francisco. My name is Keith Dennis. I was going to talk about the horrible driving that goes on in our city, but I better reiterate what I spoke about last year because I'm seeing it unfold right in front of my eyes. I said that there was a downsizing in the Fillmore district. They took out Jazzy Wash. But now this one I'm about to say, Marcus Bookstore is probably the first black bookstore in the nation. Okay. we need to stop downsizing our communities. Okay, we need to take a good look at what we have and build upon it. Okay, Marcus Bookstore is a treasure, and we need to find a way to get it back in the Fillmore, and we need to keep the Fillmore. It's nationally known as the Jazz District. So, ladies, may I say to you, happy Women's Month. I appreciate all the service that you supervisors do. Thank you very much, supervisors, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, supervisors. Good evening, supervisor. Scalina, Ray Cohan, Norman Yee, Jane Kim, Mark Farrell, John Avalos, Julie Christensen, Emma, Clayton. The United Missionary Council, on Earth Like Heaven Foundation, Western State Catholic Union, no charity, no paycheck, no nonprofit, no funding. Lead with principal vision, collaborate, communicate, connect to the world, get it together of all good things, and drop the best stuff for good collaboration. Construct a better constructive plan with mighty chapter of quick learning, which I please establish this chapter upon the Ancient Art Museum of San Francisco. For the world affairs are governed by destiny, human work, and timely trends. There are only some good and not so good of some everything in life. So please go with a united commonwealth, a missionary vision of spiritual force. For critical thinking is a term for proper man judgment, for good heaven, earth, human soul in way. Spiritual oneness, aperture from two flows of value, where meditation works and external mercy. Actually, I saw the mayor, I confess, one time in the Chinatown's Historic Museum, the one kind of convention. And I saw actually a later countless time, even with supervisor along with Governor Newsom. And even last year, 2 times. One time, K Tang's Church Festival. When was there some award for the Tsingtao event, and other time in the Tsingtao exposition, also a couple years ago. Yeah.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'd like to take this moment to bring to your attention that some senior citizens will be seeking residential and senior community apartments in the Bayview Hunters Point, District 10. Senior citizens residing in District 10 are holding the belief that they would be considered logical candidates for tenancy in newly built senior apartments in the area. A lottery system was established, which in theory would give all residents in district a fair opportunity to gain residence in the newly apartments. Our city government is being run by an administration comprised of a majority Asian American panel. Few African Americans hold management positions in city government. Seems that this dynamic of displacements has permitted the lottery system for housing in new apartments within District 10. I firmly believe that seniors competing for senior apartments must play on an even playing field. Example, on lock, only for Asians, give everyone access. There must not be a bias and agenda in giving seniors of other districts preferential status. The fact of the matter is people of Chinese descent are reaping the benefits and securing residence in senior apartments within District 10. Just because the cake has yellow frosting, the cake is still chocolate. This simply isn't equitable. San Francisco has seen fit to push the rocket docket system for immigrants. Why not permit the LGBT to be assigned an exclusive district? Why not affect another rocket docket for seniors of all races residing in Bayview Hunters Point in District 10? A fair shot.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Nancy Cross, and I was inspired by the presentation by Supervisor Kim, particularly in relation to apartments and apartment fires. I've been very apprehensive of and concerned about situations that I find that even in brand new buildings, there is a failure to obey the housing code, and fire codes in relation to brand new Mercy housing buildings for low-income tenants, which you will be looking into more because you need so much housing in the low-income fashion. The advertisements of the apartments say that they're modifications on request of the applicant, but I found this doesn't exist. They ignore it. And if you don't continue without ever having a definition of what the project can be and a compliant and not satisfied with no compliance with San Francisco housing code, you lose your opportunity for the housing. And just because you wouldn't sign waivers and indemnities that if you did sign, you would lose all benefits that would make things right. So I would appreciate more attention for people who might be very low-income people and needing housing, that they actually get opportunities with code compliances necessary to prevent fire accidents and injuries to the health of the people looking for housing.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Peter Warfield, Executive Director of Library Users Association. In about 1 week, mid-March, the library will go to BiblioCommons, a product that is supposed to be an improvement on the catalog but has many serious problems. I'll be using the overhead. As I've mentioned to you a number of times previously, BiblioCommons is privacy smashing in a variety of ways. BiblioCommons is biblio-censorship in a whole range of ways. They take upon themselves the right to toss out any comments on, for example, books that 3 people in their system of 200 libraries and presumably 4 million plus registrants flag, quote unquote, and then it's entirely within their discretion to kick those out. They also take upon themselves the right to stop people from participating at their will and with no review, no due process. That's not appropriate in a library, which is a limited public forum. BiblioCommons exploits the patrons by taking to themselves the right, as they put it, to sublicense, to use, copy, publicly display, reformat, translate, excerpt, perform, adapt, create derivative works from, and distribute content that the patrons have provided. BiblioCommons is highly deceptive in a variety of ways, contradictory statements within their terms, and when you are in BiblioCommons, it's not clear that you can, for example, reserve a book without registering for them if you click on their one-click feature. Our contact information is libraryusers2004@yahoo.com, and I recommend...
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, President Breed and other victims of the cabal. My name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 6th and Howard, currently 14 meters and 10 blocks from sea level. I rise to comment on the utility of mass public transportation. The existing model was developed in the 16th century with the introduction of public coach routes. Boxes on wheels with a driver on top pulled by horses over dirt roads. We have managed to replace hay with gasoline, to cover the dirt with asphalt and rails, and to put the driver inside the box. Otherwise, nothing has changed. BART, our favorite Cadillac of transportation systems, was promised to be fully automated by 1990. The system was supposed to provide a continuous flow of movement to and from the center, and BART was going to be free because we wouldn't have any drivers to fund pensions and health care for. Does anyone else remember the big pit that we now call Market Street? I could stand on the sidewalk at night and hear the sound of rats scrabbling 5 stories down. I remember the pit, and I remember those promises. They're making more promises. Don't believe them. there will be no more need for BART. We will finally manage to put all drivers inside a chip. We will raise the density and the safety of street traffic by an order of magnitude and multiply the average trip speed by 3. We will replace a single 100-person train car at $10 million per with 500 two-person robocars at $20,000 per. Such a deal will not be ignored. Thank you, President Breed.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Amy Fairweiss, founder of Neighbors Developing Divisadero. In a time when developers are scouring our neighborhoods for properties they can demolish for market rate condos, let's celebrate developers of past and present who developed community assets to enhance local culture. And let's work hard to prevent the further displacement or demolition of the cultural assets that are still here. Let's celebrate Samuel Levin, who brought the Harding Theater to 616 Divisadero in the early 20th century. The Examiner ad for the Harding's 1926 opening night read, "The purpose of each Levin Theater is to become the center of its community recreational life, enhancing the enjoyment of its people." Levin's Harding Theater served the Divisadero community for over 7 decades as a venue for performing arts and film, as well as a gathering space for social justice movements and worship. But the Harding Theater has been boarded up and blighted since 2003, when a group of developers bought the historic theater for $1.3 million with the intent to demolish it and build mixed-use retail and condos. Neighbors prevented the Harding Theater from being demolished with the help of the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission in 2005. I first noticed the boarded-up Harding Theater in my own neighborhood back in 2007. In 2012, the property owners took it off the market when my nonprofit launched a campaign to purchase it. And then last year, they refused a $4 million offer that would have transformed the Harding Theater into a bookstore and multimedia performance venue. The property owners have a new plan to develop 9 condos adjacent to the stage without rehabilitating the theater. If you truly care about preserving arts and cultural venues in San Francisco, if you truly care, Board of Supervisors, we can't allow this project to move forward unless it also involves taking the Harding from blight to opening night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. John DiDonato from San Francisco. I hope you all have a sense of humor. A few weeks ago, you passed legislation making it legal for gas stations to have only gender-neutral restrooms available. I see looming on the horizon another politically correct war, whether to leave the toilet seat up or down, instigated by some who refuse to accept the fact that the majority of men and women have different plumbing from each other. For years, most women have enjoyed the privacy of a woman-only restroom, thus always finding the seat in the proper down position and not finding the seat wet from some previous male non-straight shooter. I have nothing against gender-neutral restrooms if they would have a urinal in the room for men. That way, women could continue to find a nice, clean, dry toilet seat with the seat in the proper down position, and men can enjoy standing at attention in front of a urinal. Men and women then could have the equal but separate civil and God-given rights to relieve themselves in the proper way. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Madeline Savitt, folks for Polk. I'd like very much to thank Supervisors Kim and Christensen for coming to the MTA hearing regarding the decision for the plan for Polk Street recently, and for speaking there and giving very good cases for their positions. As you know, or some of you know, as of a year ago, I was a crash victim, a very lucky one, and so the issue of following statistics, real hard data, data about where to put our resources is very close to my heart. Having said that, we've talked about other issues regarding health and includes diabetes, which I'm very, very glad to hear, because the other part of diabetes prevention is activity. There's no doubt about it. And what we have done basically is what we do is hinder progress toward creating safer movement around the city for people when we don't fully implement what we know to be the best practice in that regard. The costs are not only our health, but also the construction costs increase the longer we delay. What I would like to do is urge this body to support the MTA and to also urge them to use simpler things and to use every tool in their toolbox, including the liberal use and good positioning of paint, the least costly of all their tools, and to be representative of the NACTO guidelines, which are very, very clearly and well thought out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. I was sitting in the audience just now. It was almost comical to me how our supervisor and other supervisors are worried about the sugar consumption of black people. Well, let's look at this. Black people in Bayview Hunters Point get 0.1% of the dollars that's being spent on construction, in case y'all don't know it. 55% of all prisoners in California are black people. If you want something to talk about, I'll give you something to talk about. I don't understand for the life of me why the Board of Supervisors, particularly the two black supervisors, don't understand that the race to put black people out of San Francisco is damn near over. I mean, how can you just think that these white people are not interested in putting black people out of San Francisco? And if you think that, you're crazy. This has been going on for the last 50 years. Now we're down to the point of where I was at a meeting last week and was requested to ask you to name Bayview Hunters Point Africa Town. And that was funny in that meeting, because it's all right to have a Chinatown, Japantown, Koreatown, but it ain't all right to have an African town. But slavery was right at one time. 3/4 of the human being was in the Constitution that black people were not human. So now we're in the 21st century, and there's a law, Proposition 209, say the white contractors do not have to employ black contractors. That is why black people are not working on no jobs in Bayview Hunters Point. And you need to look, Malia, it is more serious than you got any idea it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Dwayne Gaines. I'm also for Bayview Hunters Point from Alice Griffin Complex. I'm 50 years old. I'm a native of San Francisco. I was born in San Francisco General Hospital. I seen the Black Panthers. I seen Feinstein. I seen Moscone. I seen Dan White. I'm still at Alice Griffin and I'm unemployed. And I got a 2-bedroom with my son. Why am I unemployed? And I'm a native. I've been here all my life. And it's taking it right under us. And all I've been hearing was construction. There's no more love, no more community. All that's gone when Feinstein and them left. This is all about money now. How many supervisors or people work in the city actually natives or live in the city? It's not many of us around. And then the ones around, still around, getting, excuse my language, shit and pissed on. And this is my city. I graduated in 1983, Balboa High School under Shirley Thornton. I got a letter from Galvin Newsom. It's sad. It's sad. It's very sad. So we come up with this idea to have a mayor of District 10. And nothing against none of you supervisors. We need somebody to look at the little fellas like us and see what you guys doing and where this money going and how we can benefit from it. Instead of these outside communities come and getting the refund and a repo. We get nothing. I'm still a native of San Francisco. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, President Breed. My name is John Ma. I'm a surgeon in San Francisco, resident of District 5. I'd like to thank all of the supervisors for your important work, and particularly to thank Supervisors Wieners, Supervisor Cohen, Supervisor Marr for their intelligence and vision to continue to protect the health of San Franciscans from the hazards of sugar-sweetened beverages. I'd like to thank Supervisor Farrell in particular for his intelligence to champion the legislative process to reduce the impact of chewing tobacco on both our baseball heroes and their young fans, and to utilize the legislative process to assist Major League Baseball. Thank you for your leadership, and Happy Lunar New Year.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Paulette Brown, and I like to use the overhead.
SF Gov TV, can you please turn the overhead on?
I'm back again. I'm talking about my son, Arbery Abracasa, who was murdered August 14, 2006, to a semi-automatic gun. 30 rounds of bullets left that gun into my son. I still, today, have no justice. My son's case is a cold case. My son's birthday is next month, April 6th. And I am in pain. I need justice for my son. We have public safety. Even though it's been 8 years, it's still yesterday to me. I deserve justice for my child. I carry my pictures around with me because I want people to see how I feel. This is my son laying on a gurney, lifeless. He was full of life, and someone took his life. And as a mother, I have no choice but to fight. And I will continue to do this until I get some closure, even though what may not be a full closure for me. But if I can get a little bit of closure, the people that murdered my son are still walking the street to kill again. How long are we going to let this happen? When are we going to wait until it hits someone else's home before someone else does something about it? How many cold cases out there that are not solved, and mothers like myself are suffering in silence? I stand out. I shouldn't have to do this as a mother. I shouldn't have to stand out there and degrade myself in front of people. But I do this every day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Gungay Fa Choi, and I would like to say, I hope that Selma and the president and what Mr. Lewis did speaks to San Francisco, because what I have here in my hand is files from 2005 to 15 where I've been going through racial discrimination and homophobia living in an SRO hotel, police reports. I'm going to put it online. My line is 415-SFW-Gmail. No, S415-SFWP@gmail.com. You're going to be able to see the police reports. San Francisco, we need to have a better city that deal with race in this city. I see that on the Chinese New Year parade, that Asians for Blacks was the article in here. But I'm also concerned about the firefighter who is positive. And we have a city that's not even able to educate our firemen on it. When they come to my place as a positive person, I knew there was something. God is bringing a lot out about San Francisco. And you know what? This is the picture of me right here. This is me in 2000 when I went to the Million Marijuana March. We are in 25 states now. See me right here? And you know, it's amazing. We have speed, we have heroin, we have crack. Get the Bayview paper and read about the crack epidemic that Donald Lacey talked about. Get the Epoch paper and talk about how in Chinese is have all the stuff that speed that goes to Mexico to come to America. So the speed goes from China, the product comes to Mexico and come here. We are not taking, something's wrong in the city where our leadership is not standing up for what we've already won and where we're at. And the young lady who talked about if the rich get housed and there'll be more on Sunday for other people. It is time that we have a board of supervisors that work for the people as well as the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Juicy. Next speaker, please.
My name Vladimir Prikupets. I am 83 years old Jew, survived Holocaust, now United States, this country, fascist, put me on the street. Can you believe, can you think that your parents or your grandparents sleeping in 83 years old, sleeping on the street, eating from the garbage can like homeless people, drinking from the garbage can, and your board of supervisors don't do anything. It's, look what is around you. You're so rich country, and you keep millions of people on the street who never saw a doctor. It's fascism. It's worse than any country. And you are talking about that United States go. The biggest mistake when Jewish organization came to Soviet Union and said, Jew, come to United States. You will believe like people. No, we are living like dogs, like animals. This is not people on the street. It's animals. We call them homeless people. It's a lie. It's animals.
Thank you. Are there any other members who'd like to provide any public comment at this time? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Madam Clerk, can you please read the reference to committee items?
Items 22 through...
Without reference to committee items.
Items 22 through 26 are being considered for immediate adoption without committee reference. These items are considered routine unless a member objects, and a single roll call vote could enact these items.
Okay. Does any member want to sever any item from the reference to committee without reference to committee? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On items 22 through 26, Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those resolutions are adopted and the motion is approved unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please read the next item?
Madam President, I have no in memoriams today.
Okay. Is there any more business before us today?
That concludes the business before the board today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.
Don't get